The Great Barrier Reef was once a scene of thriving coral, but one environmental writer has claimed it is now beyond help. The Great Barrier Reef of Australia passed away in 2016 after a long illness. It was 25 million years old, wrote Rowan Jacobson in Outside magazine. Recent pictures show many parts of the reef appear full of swampy algae, brown sludge and rubble, and it is estimated 93% of Great Barrier Reef has been affected by bleaching, which can kill corals. In his obituary, Jacobson wrote the Great Barrier Reef was predeceased by the South Pacific's Coral Triangle, the Florida Reef off the Florida Keys, and most other coral reefs on Earth. It is survived by the remnants of the Belize Barrier Reef and some deep-water corals. However, a Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority report released this week said its preliminary findings show 22% of coral on the reef died due to the worst mass bleaching event on record. However, that's not to say the remaining coral is not in dire trouble. A destructive bleaching process has already affected about 93% of the Great Barrier Reef as of April this year, according to scientists at James Cook University. The latest before and after shots of the devastating effect of coral loss in the tropical far north Queensland in recent years. The two images above, taken in the 1950s and this year at Port Douglas on the Coral Sea, show the shocking comparison of how the natural wonder is under global scrutiny. Global Environmental Conservation Organization WWF released the recently discovered 1950s photo to illustrate an example of what's been lost in 6 decades. The black and white shows a young woman paddling near corals in the shallow end of the water in Dixon Inlet, initially known as Coral Gardens, in the early 1950s, surrounded by healthy symmetrical shapes of corals. The classic image shows the famous old sugar wharf clearly visible in the top right corner, and in a recent photo taken at the same location this year, the corals have been replaced with dirt, algae and rubble. With the December 1st deadline looming, Australia must report to the UNESCO to demonstrate an investment strategy to save the reef. WWF Australia spokesman Sean Hubin said while there was no scientific study on what killed coral in this specific area, the pictures were indicative of what was happening along the reef's coast. Inshore reefs along the coast are deteriorating and studies say sediment, fertilizer and pesticide runoff are taking a toll on coral. Mr. Hubin said an independent report estimated it would cost $8.2 billion to achieve most of the water quality targets for the reef that governments have committed to deliver by 2025. Stopping water pollution will help restore the beautiful coral gardens choked by runoff. This image drives home what a big job we face, Mr. Hubin said. Australia must commit the $8.2 billion as a national priority to protect the reef and the tourism jobs that rely on it. Professor J. Ian Charlie Veron, known as the godfather of coral, said the two photographs showed a very interesting comparison. One of the best I have seen, he told WWF. That said, I have seen many and they all tell the same story. This was taken 20 years before my time, but in the early 70s, corals were as illustrated here for most places I worked on. From all that I have seen, the coral gardens of the entire coastal margin of the Great Barrier Reef have been destroyed. This comes as coral samples dating back thousands of years show evidence of the human impact on the reef. Researchers have claimed. University of Queensland professor Greg Webb said coral cores taken from along the Queensland coastline showed definable difference in trace element chemistry, including those linked to European arrival in Australia. We can look at ancient events where they've been stressed by bad water, high nutrients, but also just sediment load and see what killed them, what was sublethal, how common events are, and just get an idea of what the reef can handle, he said.